You know that feeling, right? That little flicker, that instant judgment, that gut feeling that just knows something, but you can't really explain why.
Oh, absolutely. Happens all the time.
Yeah, like deciding if you trust someone new or, taking a weird route home that just feels faster.
Or even just picking something off a menu based on a sudden, urge.
Exactly. It's intuition.
Yeah.
And it feels so, human, something deep under the surface. But what if the mechanism isn't actually unique? What if that little nudge, that quick decision, is basically a kind of subconscious AI running in our heads, using these rapid, complex calculations we're not even aware of?
That is a really fascinating, maybe even slightly unsettling question, isn't it?
It is.
And it's one that science is seriously starting to dig into now, pulling together insights from, neuroscience, psychology, and all the crazy advances in machine learning.
Right.
Are these two things, our evolved biological gut feeling and the artificial intelligence we're building, are they fundamentally similar in how they, compute things underneath?
Exactly. That's the big question we're tackling in this deep dive. We've gathered a whole stack of your sources, research papers, articles, debating this stuff, some really interesting notes to explore this intersection.
Yeah.
We're basically going to dissect the science of intuition and stack it up against how modern AI makes decisions and predictions.
And our mission here, for you listening, is to kind of synthesize all this material.
Yeah.
We want to help you get a handle on what intuition really is, according to the science today, how it compares to what AI can do, and what that comparison tells us.
Not just about AI, but about our own minds, too.
Exactly, about our own minds. It's meant to be a shortcut, really, to getting informed on this pretty complex topic, pulling out the most important bits from the sources.
Okay, let's jump right in then. To get started, we need a baseline. So according to the sources you provided, what exactly is human intuition? How are researchers actually defining it?
Well, the sources are pretty consistent on the definition. At its core, it's described as that immediate understanding, that gut feeling you mentioned. It's a kind of knowledge or judgment that just pops up without conscious reasoning, without you thinking through step-by-step logic. It's quick, automatic, feels almost instinctive.
So you don't actively think your way there, the answer just arrives.
Precisely. And this is a key point the sources really hammer home. It's not magic. It's not random.
Okay.
It's based on past experiences. Often, years and years of accumulated data and patterns you've picked up just by living. But, and this is crucial, you don't consciously pull up those specific memories or process them step by step when the intuition hits.
So it feels non-analytic to us, even if there's a process happening.
Exactly. Think about an expert chess player. They might just see the right move instantly in a really complex game. They aren't consciously analyzing every single possibility like a beginner would have to.
Right, they just know.
Yeah. And the sources bring up psychologist Gerd Gedrenzer's work here. He frames it nicely as expert snap judgments. These judgments come from super fast subconscious processing of this huge database of experience and learned patterns.
Okay, so it's not illogical, it just feels pre-logical because the heavy lifting is happening below conscious awareness. It's tapping into this massive unconscious library of everything we've ever encountered.
You got it. And the sources really characterize this as a deeply biological thing, rooted in how our brains are actually structured. It involves not just, processing information, but crucially, it blends in emotions and instincts.
The feeling part.
Yes, that integration is what gives intuition its subjective feeling quality, even if the calculations underneath are subconscious. So it's biological, subconscious, and it feeds into our overall conscious experience and how we make decisions.
That makes sense. It's not just cold data processing. It has that warmth or weight of emotion tied to it.
Which, as we'll definitely get into, is a major point of comparison or contrast with AI.
Right. Okay, so that's human intuition. Now, let's flip to the other side. How do the sources define artificial intelligence, especially in the context of this comparison we're making?
So in this context, AI is defined pretty broadly as, a computer system built to do tasks that usually need human intelligence.
Like learning, problem solving.
Exactly. Learning from data, solving problems, making decisions or predictions. And the kind of AI relevant here, machine learning systems, especially things like the large language models, the LLMs that power chatbots and stuff, they work by being trained on absolutely massive data sets.
Massive meaning.
Yeah.
Like huge chunks of the internet, zillions of images.
Often way more than that, depending on the model. We're talking petabytes sometimes of text, images, sound, whatever that data is. And the AI's core job is basically to crunch through all that data to find complex patterns, statistical relationships, hidden regularities.
So?
Once it's trained, it uses those learned patterns to do things like predict the next word in your sentence, or spot a face in a picture, or, recommend a movie you might like.
So it's all about recognizing patterns and making predictions based on the data it's seen.
Exactly. And the sources draw a really critical distinction here. AI runs purely on algorithms, mathematical rules, functions, and the data it was trained on. It doesn't have subjective experience like we do.
No feeling of knowing.
Right. It doesn't feel happiness or fear or regret. Now, it can be programmed to simulate emotions, based on patterns it learned from how humans express emotions in language or behavior. But it doesn't have the underlying biological, actual feeling of it. It's fundamentally a technological computational system.
Okay, got it. So human intuition, biological, subconscious, feels emotional based on lived experience, leads to a subjective feeling. AI, technological, computational, data-driven, algorithmic, no subjective experience, no real emotions.
That sets the stage perfectly. So the core debate in these sources isn't really, are they identical? Because, well, clearly they're not. It's more like, do they share fundamental subconscious algorithmic strategies? Is our human intuition, at its computational core, doing things that are surprisingly similar to how advanced AI processes information and makes those quick judgments? Even if the hardware brain versus chip and the subjective experience are totally different.
Or the difference is just too deep for the comparison to hold much water.
That's the crux of it.
Wow. It really makes you stop and think about what that gut feeling actually is. Are we just really, really complex biological machines running these highly evolved predictive algorithms?
That's exactly the fascinating, maybe slightly unnerving intersection the sources are exploring. And to understand it better, we probably need to dive deeper into how human intuition actually works first. What's neuroscience telling us is happening inside our brains during that gut feeling moment?
Yeah, this is where it gets super interesting and maybe a little mind-bending. The sources talk about specific brain regions lighting up during intuitive tasks, stuff they see using fMRI scans that measure brain activity.
Absolutely. One area that pops up a lot is the median orbitofrontal cortex, the OFC. The sources talk about its crucial role in decisions driven by emotion. It seems to be like a hub, integrating all sorts of information, sensory input, memories, and especially emotional tags or cues, and doing it subconsciously.
So it's connecting feelings to information automatically.
It seems that way, yeah. This integration in the OFC appears to directly contribute to that feeling of knowing something is right or wrong, or liking or disliking something intuitively. It's like the brain quickly slaps an emotional value onto incoming information based on past outcomes.
So it creates that emotional color behind the intuition, even before we consciously think about the information itself.
Precisely. And then there's another key player, the anterior insula.
The insula?
Yeah. This region is vital for processing and integrating sensory input and its emotional importance, its valence. It's often linked to that actual physical gut feeling and translating your internal body states and emotions into a conscious feeling or sensation. It's crucial for assessing risk and making decisions based on those internal signals.
So the insula might be involved in that knot in your stomach or that feeling in your chest when you have a strong intuition.
That's believed to be part of its function, yes. Connecting the mind's intuition to the body's feelings. And then, of course, there's the amygdala.
The fear center.
Well, it's known for processing emotions, especially survival-related ones like fear and anxiety, but also other strong emotions. The sources note how the amygdala feeds this emotional context into our rapid judgments. So an intuitive sense of danger in a dark alley, for example, might be heavily driven by the amygdala, quickly assessing subtle cues based on past learning about threats.
Okay, so intuition isn't just some abstract pattern-matching thing.
Yeah.
It's deeply biological, tangled up with our emotional state and how our brain has wired feelings to past experiences and potential outcomes.
Absolutely. And that deep emotional integration is, well, one of the trickiest things for AI to genuinely replicate. But it's not just about emotion. The brain is also incredibly fast at spotting non-emotional patterns.
Right.
The sources discuss the ventral occipitotemporal cortex playing a role here, specifically through processing something called visual gist.
Visual gist? What's that? Sounds cool.
It is cool. Think of it as your brain's ability to grasp the overall meaning or essence of a complex visual scene almost instantly, like in milliseconds.
Wow.
It's not about consciously identifying every single object, but getting the general feel, the layout, the atmosphere, the category like busy street or calm forest or messy room. This super fast automatic assessment lets you detect patterns in the visual world before you're even consciously aware of the specific details making up that pattern.
Like walking into a party and instantly getting a vibe. Maybe it feels lively, maybe it feels awkward before you've even had time to scan everyone's faces properly.
Exactly like that. Your brain is picking up on a whole constellation of subtle visual cues and patterns without you needing to consciously tick them off one by one. It gives you that rapid, intuitive sense of the situation.
That makes total sense. It's like a background process, constantly summarizing the world for you.
It is. And this rapid subconscious processing connects directly to some really interesting findings about unconscious prediction. The sources talk about studies, both classic and new, showing brain activity that predicts our decisions before we're consciously aware of making them.
Ah, this is the Libet experiment stuff, right?
Exactly. They revisit Benjamin Libet's foundational work from the 80s. He used EEG and found this readiness potential brain activity in the motor cortex preparing for a movement ramping up about 300 to 500 milliseconds before people reported consciously deciding to make the movement.
Yeah, that experiment always messes with your head. It feels like our brain decides before we do.
It definitely sparked a massive debate about free will, that's for sure. And modern research using fancier tools like fMRI has pushed that predictive window even further back in time.
Further back than half a second.
Oh, yeah. Studies mentioned in the sources, looking at brain areas like the frontopolar cortex, have found activity patterns that can predict which of two buttons someone will press up to 7 seconds before they consciously report making the choice.
7 seconds. That's practically an eternity in brain time. So your brain might be lining up a decision seconds ahead, and your conscious awareness only catches up much later.
It strongly suggests there's a significant neural basis for intuition, or at least preconscious processing, that operates well before deliberate conscious thought kicks in. The sources often describe this as a preconscious preparation phase. The brain, drawing on its internal models and learned patterns, seems to start leaning towards one option long before that preference bubbles up into conscious awareness.
Wow. So maybe the intuition is that early inclination, processed deeply and ahead of time, and conscious thought comes later, maybe to approve it or perhaps even change it.
That's certainly one interpretation the sources support, yes. Which then raises the question, how does the brain manage all this constant, super fast, mostly unconscious processing without just being completely swamped by all the information flooding in?
Good question. It seems like it would be overwhelming.
Well, another really elegant mechanism the sources discuss involves brain rhythms, specifically these things called alpha wave oscillations. They're particularly strong in the occipital cortex, the visual processing area. And these alpha waves aren't just background noise. They seem to play an active role in suppressing predictable sensory input.
Suppressing predictable stuff. Why would my brain want to ignore things it expects to see or hear?
It's a brilliant efficiency strategy. It ties directly into that predictive coding idea we'll get to. Basically, if your brain's internal models can accurately predict the sensory information coming in, like the unchanging texture of the wall you're looking at or the steady hum of your computer fan, then it doesn't need to waste precious conscious processing power on it. The alpha waves effectively turn down the volume on the neural signals related to those expected predictable stimuli.
Okay, so the brain predicts, okay, I expect to see smooth white wall, and if the input matches, it just kind of goes, yep, got it, moving on, and suppresses that signal.
Pretty much. This frees up the brain to prioritize anything unexpected or novel. If something deviates from the prediction, a flicker of movement, a sudden sound, something out of place, that mismatch, that prediction error gets flagged, and cognitive resources are directed towards that. It's a way to conserve energy and quickly notice what's new, surprising, or potentially important while efficiently tuning out the massive amount of predictable background noise.
That is wild. It's like our brain has this built-in dynamic spam filter for reality. constantly filtering out the expected noise so we can focus on the signals that actually matter.
That's a great way to put it. It's constantly filtering and prioritizing based on these internal learned models of the world, models built up from a lifetime of experience. And, beyond just the brain wiring, the sources also touch on how psychologists have thought about intuition over the years.
Yeah, I bet it's been kicked around in psychology for ages.
Oh, absolutely. The sources mention historical figures briefly, like Sigmund Freud. Apparently, he was somewhat dismissive of intuition, scientifically speaking.
Really?
Yeah, he tended to see it as non-analytic, maybe unreliable, compared to the structured process of conscious reasoning and analysis. He really valued that conscious, verbalizable thought process.
Huh. That seems a little ironic, given how much he focused on the unconscious mind influencing us. You'd think he'd value insights bubbling up from there.
It's a fair point. But maybe he felt true insight required the analytic work of bringing it consciously to light. In contrast, Carl Jung had a much more positive view.
Okay.
Jung saw intuition as one of the fundamental ways we function psychologically. He called it an irrational function, but not irrational like illogical or wrong.
More like non-rational.
Exactly. Operating outside logical, step-by-step reasoning. Jung thought intuition was a way of directly perceiving possibilities, seeing the deeper patterns or the essence of things directly through the unconscious. He saw it as distinct from sensing facts, thinking logically, or feeling emotions about things. He gave it real weight as a valid way of knowing.
So Jung saw it as a legitimate information channel, just different from our usual logical thinking.
Precisely. And these older perspectives kind of set the stage for the modern dual process theories that are really prominent in the sources, especially Daniel Kahneman's hugely influential System 1 and System 2 framework.
Ah, yes. Thinking fast and slow. System 1 and System 2.
That's the one. So System 2 is our slow, deliberate, analytical, effortful, logical thinking. That's what you use when you're solving a tough math problem or carefully weighing pros and cons for a big life decision.
Right. The heavy lifting conscious thought.
Yeah. System 1, on the other hand, is fast, automatic, intuitive, associative, and feels effortless. It runs on heuristics, mental shortcuts, rules of thumb, and it uses that rapid subconscious pattern recognition to make quick judgments and decisions.
So when we have that instant gut feeling, that snap judgment, that's our System 1 kicking into high gear, drawing on all those stored patterns and associations operating below the radar.
That's exactly where the sources place intuition within this framework. It's seen as the classic System 1 process. It's what allows us to react quickly and often effectively in complex situations without getting bogged down in analysis.
Makes sense.
And this idea of subconscious processing, fast pattern recognition, especially within a predictive way of thinking, brings us neatly to a concept that acts as this powerful bridge between brains and AI. Predictive coding.
Predictive coding. Okay, sounds pretty technical, like something out of computer science.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's actually a really fundamental idea that's now used heavily in both neuroscience and AI, and it's super central to the comparison the sources are making.
So what is it basically?
The theory of predictive coding suggests that our brain isn't just passively soaking up sensory information from the world like a sponge.
Okay.
Instead, it's an active prediction machine. It's constantly generating internal models or forecasts about what sensory input it expects to receive based on everything it's learned before.
So my brain is basically making guesses about reality all the time, second by second.
Constantly, nonstop. It's this ongoing loop. Higher-level brain areas send prediction signals down to lower-level sensory areas. Those lower areas compare the prediction to what's actually coming in through your senses.
And if it matches?
If it matches, great. Prediction confirmed. The brain doesn't need to waste resources on it. That's where those alpha waves suppressing predictable input come in handy. But if there's a mismatch, if the actual sensory input is different from the prediction that generates a prediction error signal, that error signal gets sent back up to the higher areas, basically saying, hey, your model was wrong. Update it.
I see.
And this constant cycle, predict, compare, find errors, update the model, that's how the brain learns and adapts to the world around it. The sources even mention networks like the default mode network, the one that's active when you're just resting or mind wandering, might be involved in this kind of resting state forecasting, constantly running simulations of future possibilities based on past experiences.
So even when I'm zoning out, my brain is still busy predicting stuff, prepping for what might happen next.
That seems to be a core part of its operation, yeah. It helps us react quickly and efficiently because our brain already has expectations set up, and it can instantly flag anything that breaks those expectations. And here's the kicker. This whole predictive coding mechanism, this constant guessing, comparing, and updating based on errors, is also absolutely fundamental to how modern AI works.
Really? How does AI use that same idea?
Well, modern AI, especially deep learning models like recurrent neural networks, RNNs, and transformers, which are the engines behind things like ChatGPT, they rely heavily on predictive algorithms.
Okay.
Think about how an LLM generates text. It's constantly predicting the next word or the next token in a sequence based on the words that came before it and the patterns it learned during its massive training phase.
Like it guessing the end of my sentence as I type.
Exactly like that. That's predictive coding in action. These models take input, the start of your sentence, generate a prediction for the next piece, compare that prediction to what actually comes next in the real data they were trained on, and if there's an error, they adjust their internal settings, the weights and biases in the network, to make a better prediction next time.
Ah, so it learns from its mistakes, its prediction errors.
Precisely. And the sources explicitly draw an analogy here to synaptic plasticity in our brains, where the connections between our neurons get stronger or weaker based on experience and learning signals. Both systems' brains and AI are fundamentally learning by adjusting their internal state based on prediction errors.
So, okay, both human brains and sophisticated AI are essentially prediction machines, constantly generating expectations, checking them against reality or data, and learning for the discrepancies.
That seems to be the core computational strategy they share, according to the sources. They even mention a YouTube video, something like, AI just discovered how your brain secretly predicts future events.
Ah, catchy.
Right. But the point it makes is that AI models, when analyzing brain scan data from prediction experiments, can actually decode the brain's own anticipatory signals. It suggests that by building AI that mimics this predictive process computationally, we're kind of reverse engineering and highlighting the brain's own strategies. But the sources add a really important caveat here, too.
Which is?
AI, unlike our brains, lacks metacognition. It can't reflect on its own predictions or how certain it is. And it's generally limited by its initial training data. It doesn't continuously integrate new real-world experiences in the same dynamic way our brains do.
That's a huge difference. The AI does the prediction, using similar math maybe,
Right.
but it doesn't have self-awareness about it, and it isn't constantly learning from the messy, real-time world like we are.
Exactly. So this predictive coding idea gives us a really strong bridge, showing how the basic computational approach to handling information and making quick judgments can look remarkably similar. But like you said, this leads us right into the big comparison. Where do they actually line up, and where are the crucial differences?
Okay, let's get into that comparison then. Based on the sources, what are the shared mechanisms, the similarities, that make people argue that intuition is kind of like a subconscious AI?
The sources highlight several key overlaps. First off, pattern recognition. Both are incredibly good at it, especially with complex, noisy information.
Okay.
Human intuition lets us spot subtle patterns like reading tiny microexpressions on a face to get a feel for someone's mood, or recognizing a song from just a couple of notes. AI algorithms are literally designed to sift through huge data sets to find statistical patterns, identifying objects in photos, flagging weird financial transactions, spotting anomalies in sensor data.
Got it. So both are expert pattern finders, whether the patterns are in sensory input or digital data streams.
Right. Fundamentally, they extract patterns. Second big similarity, efficiency. Both our intuition, System 1, and a lot of modern AI operations prioritize speed by skipping the slow, step-by-step conscious deliberation.
Right. Intuition is fast.
Super fast. It allows for quick responses when time matters. And similarly, AI's System 1-like processes like an LLM spitting out the next word or an image recognizer classifying an object they operate in milliseconds. The sources point out that AI, much like our intuition using mental shortcuts or heuristics, often makes rapid, probabilistic guesses to be fast and useful rather than doing exhaustive calculations. That's very similar to how our intuitive shortcuts work.
Yeah, that definitely clicks with how intuition feels. It's quick, maybe not always perfectly accurate, but it gives you an answer now.
And that speed is often the most useful thing, evolutionarily or computationally. Third, adaptation. Both get better with experience.
How so?
Well, our intuitive skills get refined over time through practice and exposure. This leads to neuroplasticity. Our brain physically changes, rewires itself to get better and faster at recognizing those specific patterns. AI improves through its training processes like backpropagation, where it learns from its prediction errors to adjust its internal network weights, or reinforcement learning, where it learns through trial and error based on rewards. It adjusts its parameters to perform better based on the data it sees.
Okay, so whether it's wetware or hardware, practice and feedback lead to better, faster pattern recognition and judgment.
Exactly. The learning mechanisms are different physically, but they serve a similar function, refining performance based on interaction with data or the environment. Fourth, they both involve forms of subconscious or non-conscious processing.
Right, we don't see the steps in our intuition.
Exactly. It operates below conscious awareness. And
Yeah.
similarly, the incredibly complex calculations happening inside a deep neural network are completely opaque. There's no conscious awareness in the AI. The sources mention LLMs using heuristics as an example here. They function based on probabilistic patterns learned implicitly from data, generating outputs without following explicit conscious rules, much like our intuition uses those mental shortcuts.
So neither system can necessarily give you a clear step-by-step breakdown of exactly how it reached a specific conclusion in that moment.
Correct. The process is hidden from introspection in humans, and it's famously a black box in complex AI. And finally, a really important and often troubling shared feature bias.
Ah, yeah.
Both are heavily influenced by the data they learn from. Our intuition absorbs all sorts of personal, cultural, and experiential biases over our lifetime. These can lead to quick but unfortunately prejudiced judgments. AI, similarly, inherits biases directly from its training data.
So if the data reflects society's problems,
Then the AI learns those problems. If the data contains societal inequalities, stereotypes, historical prejudices, the AI will learn those biases and potentially replicate or even amplify them in its decisions. It might favor certain groups or outcomes in ways that mirror human intuitive biases.
that's a really critical and pretty scary parallel. The flaws in the information we feed the AI become its flaws, just like our own experiences, and the biases in society shape our intuitive biases.
It's a stark reminder that intelligence, whether it's biological or artificial, isn't neutral. It reflects its learning environment, warts and all. And the sources also bring in some specific experiments to test these similarities more directly.
Like going back to those brain prediction studies.
Exactly. Those findings Libet's original work and the modern fMRI studies showing brain activity predicting choices seconds before conscious awareness, they're seen as directly relevant here.
Because it shows the brain doing predictive work subconsciously.
Right. And the parallel is that AI models, when trained on the fMRI data from those experiments, can actually analyze those neural patterns and predict the participants' decisions with accuracy significantly better than just guessing.
Whoa. So the AI can look at my brainwaves, basically, and predict which button I'm about to press, even before I feel like I've made up my mind.
Yeah.
That does sound eerily similar to how my own brain seems to be predicting my actions ahead of time.
It definitely reinforces that idea of shared computational principles around prediction. The sources specifically mention one quite compelling study from 2024. Researchers trained an AI on fMRI data while people made simple, spontaneous choices, like pressing one button or another.
Yeah.
The AI could predict their choices based on brain activity patterns, sometimes seconds in advance, with about 70% accuracy, which again really mirrors the brain's own predictive forecasting abilities. But, and this is a really crucial but that the sources stress, the AI in that study, and generally completely failed to replicate or predict a key aspect of human decision-making that's strongly tied to intuition, the affective dimension.
The affective dimension, you mean the feelings, the emotions involved.
Precisely. The AI could predict the likely choice based on the neural patterns linked to that preconscious preparation. But it couldn't predict when someone might override that initial tendency because of an emotional factor, like maybe choosing not to take a potential reward because they suddenly felt a pang of guilt or fairness.
Ah, so the AI sees the statistical likelihood based on past patterns in the brain, but it can't model that sudden intervention of feeling.
Exactly. It points to a fundamental gap. While AI can mimic the predictive number crunching of intuition, it currently can't replicate that deep integration of subjective emotional states that are so core to our human gut feelings and our value-based choices.
Okay, that feels like the big separator again. My intuition isn't just a raw prediction. It's a prediction colored by how things felt in the past. The AI just doesn't have that felt history.
Precisely. And that leads us right into the divergent features, the critical differences that the sources really emphasize when you compare intuition and AI.
All right, so beyond the missing emotions, what else makes human intuition fundamentally different from just being subconscious AI?
Well, the first and maybe the most profound difference is consciousness and subjectivity itself.
Okay.
While the processing that underlies our intuition might be subconscious, the actual experience of having an intuition is part of our phenomenal consciousness, our subjective first-person awareness. You feel the gut feeling. You have a qualitative experience of that insight, even if you can't explain where it came from.
Right, there's what it's like to have an intuition.
Exactly. AI, even the most sophisticated models today, lacks that. It lacks self-awareness, lacks subjective experience. It runs complex algorithms as a black box of calculations, but it doesn't experience anything from the inside. The sources are really clear on this, often framing AI as trying to copy or emulate intuition, which inherently means it's not the same thing. It's an artificial approximation. So the AI might simulate or mimic the output of intuition based on analyzing patterns, but it's not having the conscious, subjective feeling of having an intuition.
That's the core distinction. It's emulation, not embodiment. And tied very closely to that is the point about emotional integration we just touched on.
Right.
As we discussed, our intuition is deeply interwoven with emotional context through brain areas like the amygdala and insula. Our gut feelings are soaked in the emotional flavor of past experiences. Fear shapes risk assessment. Excitement drives exploration. Empathy influences social intuition. AI, on the other hand, processes data neutrally, unless it's specifically programmed to simulate an emotional response based on patterns it learned from human data.
It doesn't feel the fear, it just processes data labeled fear.
Exactly. The sources state this very clearly. AI lacks the genuine emotions, the instincts, the subjective lived experiences that give human gut feelings their unique character and persuasive power. It doesn't feel trust or suspicion. It calculates probabilities based on data associated with those concepts. That feels like a massive difference. My intuition is shaped by my personal history of feeling things, not just neutrally observing events.
It's arguably one of the biggest qualitative gaps. Another area where they diverge is in creativity and how they handle errors.
Okay, how so?
Human intuition can sometimes spark genuine creative leaps, novel insights that go beyond just rearranging known patterns. Think of an artist making an intuitive color choice that creates a totally new effect, or a scientist having that intuitive flash that leads to a brand new hypothesis, something really outside the established box.
Right, those aha moments.
Exactly. But we're also very prone to cognitive biases, systematic errors in thinking that can lead our intuition way off track, often repeatedly. AI, on the other hand, often struggles with truly out-of-distribution situations, problems, or data totally unlike anything it was trained on.
It can't handle true novelty easily.
Not easily. And while AI can generate outputs that seem creative by cleverly remixing and extrapolating from its vast training data, the sources suggest it currently lacks the capacity for genuine paradigm-shifting novelty in the human sense. But conversely, while we humans can get stuck repeating the same intuitive mistakes due to our biases, AI has systematic error correction mechanisms, like backpropagation. It can methodically adjust its responses based on new data to reduce errors, something humans often find hard when confronting their own intuitive blind spots.
Oh, so maybe AI is brilliant at remixing and refining within its learned domain. But humans have the potential for those occasional, truly radical leaps beyond that domain. And AI might be better at systematically fixing certain kinds of mistakes than we are, even if we're better at generating the really new ideas.
That seems to capture the complex picture. The sources paint, yes, humans. Potential for brilliant leaps, but prone to recurring biases. AI methodical error correction within its known world, but limited in true outside-the-box creativity and handling the truly unknown. And the final, maybe most fundamental difference is just their origin. Biological versus technological?
Yeah, that seems pretty basic.
It is, but it's crucial. Human intuition is a biological process shaped by millions of years of evolution acting on the structure and function of our brains. AI is a technological creation designed and built by humans using algorithms and silicon chips. The sources consistently frame the evidence as supporting the view that AI is a form of artificial intuition, a powerful emulation built using principles we've observed in brains and data, but not that human intuition is just biological AI.
That distinction feels really important. AI is a sophisticated mirror or imitation built by us, maybe using principles learned from studying ourselves, but it's fundamentally different from the organic, evolved process inside our own heads. It's a tool we made reflecting some of our processes, but not actually possessing them in the same way.
Exactly. It's a powerful mirror, absolutely. It shows us fascinating things about computation and pattern recognition, but the reflection isn't the same as the thing being reflected. And this whole comparison, looking at the striking similarities in computation and the profound differences in experience in biology, naturally leads into some pretty hefty philosophical and ethical questions.
Like that free will question that keeps nagging whenever we talk about predicting decisions seconds in advance. If our brains are prepping choices before we're aware, and AI can predict those preps, what does that do to the idea that we are the conscious authors of our actions?
It's a classic philosophical headache, definitely given a new twist by these scientific findings. The sources discuss the perspective from neuroscientists like John Dylan Haynes, who did that fMRI work showing the long prediction windows.
Yep. What do they say? Does it kill free will?
Well, Haynes and others argue that this predictive brain activity, whether it's the early readiness potential or that frontopolar cortex activity, doesn't necessarily wipe out free will or agency entirely.
How do they square that circle if the brain acts first?
Their argument is that this preconscious activity is more like a preparation phase. It's the brain operating intuitively based on its learned patterns and current state, setting the stage, kind of queuing up a likely or default action. But, and this is the key, they argue that conscious thought can still come in and play a role.
Like a veto power.
Exactly. You might become consciously aware of that inclination that your brain was preparing, and you can choose to modulate it, maybe adjust the timing or the force, or even consciously override it completely and decide to do something different. So the prediction based on the early brain activity might show the brain's preferred or intuitive default option, but it's not necessarily seen as absolutely deterministic. There's potentially still a window for conscious intervention.
Okay, so the intuition lays the groundwork, maybe suggests the path, but the conscious self retains the ability to say, nope, changing course, or hold on, let's rethink this. That does feel like it preserves some sense of agency.
That's the interpretation favored by some researchers mentioned in the sources, yeah. It helps reconcile the neuroscience with our subjective feeling of making conscious choices, and they contrast this sharply with AI. Current AI algorithms are essentially deterministic. They run code, apply parameters based on probabilities learned from data. And AI doesn't choose in the human sense of having intentions or conscious will. It calculates and outputs what its programming and data dictate is the most probable result. This fundamental difference, biological volition versus algorithmic execution, is seen as preserving the uniqueness of human free will compared to AI's predictions. AI can predict what you're likely to do based on patterns, even brain patterns, but it can't account for that potential moment of conscious override, that subjective, I choose otherwise.
That perspective definitely offers some breathing room. It suggests intuition is a powerful engine, but our conscious mind isn't just a passenger. It still has a hand on the wheel, a role AI currently doesn't have.
That seems to be the view presented in the sources, yes. And moving beyond the philosophical deep end, these findings also have really practical and ethical implications for how we design and use AI.
Right. What can understanding our own intuition, its strengths and its weaknesses, teach us about building better, maybe safer AI?
Well, getting a deeper handle on intuition's neural basis, especially how the brain weaves together emotion, context, memory, and pattern recognition so quickly, could inspire new AI designs.
Like trying to build AI that mimics that integration.
Potentially, yes. For instance, developing AI that could emulate integrating different kinds of valence. Maybe not real emotion, but perhaps quantifiable signals representing desirability, risk, preference learned from richer data could lead to AI decisions that are more nuanced, maybe more aligned with human values and tricky areas like, say, medical diagnosis or financial advice or even educational software. The sources suggest mimicking the brain's knack for integrating these diverse signals might make AI more robust or trustworthy in complex, real-world situations.
So trying to make AI more like human context aware in its decision-making, even if it's just an emulation of the process.
Exactly, trying to capture the functional benefits of those human intuitive strategies in artificial systems. But doing that also massively ramps up the risk we talked about earlier, bias.
Right, the shared problem of biases.
Yeah.
Humans get them from life, AI gets them from data.
Exactly. And if we build AI systems designed to mimic the fast, pattern-matching style of human intuition, and we train them on data that reflects all our existing human intuitive prejudices, racial, gender, socioeconomic, whatever biases are baked into historical decisions, language, outcomes, that AI won't just learn those biases.
That could amplify them.
It could absolutely amplify them. Because AI can operate at such scale and speed, it could lead to automated decisions that are systematically unfair or discriminatory on a massive level. The sources are really strong on this point. This isn't just a theoretical worry. It demands serious ethical oversight and proactive steps to mitigate bias in AI development. We have to be incredibly careful about finding and countering these biases in data and algorithms if we want to build AI that's not just smart, but also fair.
That's a huge challenge, maybe one of the biggest in AI right now. Trying to capture the efficiency of intuition without replicating or magnifying our worst biases.
It's a central ethical concern highlighted by the sources when looking at the practical side of this intuition AI comparison, which brings us kind of naturally to where this whole field is going future directions in studying this intersection.
Yeah, it feels like neuroscience and AI research are just going to get more and more tangled up.
They definitely seem to be. There are emerging fields specifically trying to bridge this gap. One example mentioned is neurosymbolic AI.
Neurosymbolic, what's that?
It's an approach trying to combine the strengths of neural networks, which are great at that intuitive style pattern recognition we've discussed with symbolic reasoning, which is more like our explicit, logical, analytical system 2 thinking.
Oh, interesting. So trying to build AI that can do both the fast, intuitive stuff and the slow, logical stuff, like putting system 1 and system 2 together in one machine.
That's exactly the ambition. Developing these kinds of hybrid models that could potentially switch between fast, intuitive processing and slower, more analytical deliberation, kind of like our brains seem to do, could lead to AI systems that are much more versatile at solving problems and maybe more robust overall.
That sounds incredibly powerful for dealing with complex, messy, real-world problems. But how would we even know if we're getting closer? How do you measure something that feels as subjective as intuition, but in a machine?
That is a huge question for the future, and the sources touch on some potential ways forward. They suggest developing specific metrics to evaluate how well an AI is approximating certain aspects of human intuition. For example, something called predictive uncertainty calibration.
Meaning?
Basically, how well does the AI know when it's unsure? Can it distinguish between a high-confidence prediction and a low-confidence probabilistic guess? That's kind of analogous to us having a really strong gut feeling versus just a weak hunch. Another area is counterfactual reasoning. Can the AI explore alternative what-if scenarios beyond just spitting out the single most likely answer?
Like, could the AI do intuitive brainstorming? Generate several different plausible ideas or predictions instead of just one?
In a way, yeah. The sources suggest that an AI that could generate a diverse set of plausible outcomes for a problem, and maybe even evaluate their relative likelihood or desirability if we could build in some kind of value assessment, would be a much better functional mirror of how our own cognition works. We often intuitively consider multiple possibilities, right? It shifts the goal from just getting the single right answer to exploring the space of possibilities, which is a real hallmark of human thinking, including intuition.
That's a really cool way to think about it. The measure isn't just hitting the bullseye, but exploring the whole target.
Exactly. Capturing more of the cognitive process, not just the final output.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, synthesizing what we pulled from the sources today, It seems pretty clear that yes, human intuition and what we're calling subconscious AI share some genuinely deep computational mechanisms, especially around that rapid pattern recognition and predictive coding.
Yes, absolutely. They both seem to rely heavily on processing vast amounts of information, often non-consciously, to find patterns, make predictions, and arrive at quick judgments. The brain uses neurons, AI uses silicon, but the underlying algorithmic principles seem to have real similarities.
Despite those shared computational foundations, they diverge profoundly in really critical areas: consciousness, subjective experience, that deep emotional integration, and maybe even the nature of true creativity.
Absolutely. Those differences are huge. Intuition is biological, evolved, deeply tied to subjective feeling, our embodied experience, emotional context. It results in a conscious feeling of knowing or sensing something. AI is technological, a construct. It's incredibly powerful computationally, but it currently lacks that intersubjective world, that genuine emotional grounding, and perhaps that capacity for truly novel, outside-the-box creativity in the way humans experience it.
So the big takeaway from the sources isn't that our intuition is just subconscious AI running on biological hardware.
No, the sources strongly argue against that simplification. While AI models are getting scarily good at replicating the processes and sometimes the outcomes associated with intuition, they remain sophisticated tools. They lack subjective experience and that rich, messy integration of emotion that defines human gut feelings. Intuition is better understood as this complex dance between evolved neural systems operating both consciously and subconsciously. AI can emulate powerful parts of that dance computationally, but the evidence suggests it can't, at least not yet, fully embody the whole thing. It's artificial intuition, not human intuition itself.
It really sounds like in building AI, we're creating these incredible, powerful echoes of our own cognitive processes. And in doing so, we're learning just how much complexity is humming away beneath the surface of our own minds.
That's a really insightful way to put it, yeah. The very act of trying to replicate aspects of human intelligence in machines is forcing us to confront and understand our own biology and cognition in much deeper ways.
This deep dive has definitely laid out those compelling parallels, but also those essential, maybe irreducible differences. And it leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty profound thought to chew on, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Given that AI can predict our choices with startling accuracy based on brain patterns, effectively mimicking key parts of intuition's predictive power, what does this ultimately mean for how we understand consciousness itself, that subjective light inside? What about agency, our sense that we are in charge? And what are those truly unique aspects of being human that might just fundamentally transcend computation, no matter how smart the algorithms get? What parts of our mind, if any, might remain exclusively human forever beyond the reach of artificial imitation?
It's a massive question, isn't it? And it's one that's going to keep driving research in both neuroscience and AI for a long, long time. It challenges our very definitions of mind, intelligence, and what it really means to be human. And definitely something to ponder the next time you get that little unexplained nudge, that undeniable gut feeling pulling you in a certain direction.
Absolutely. Huge amount to think about. Thanks for unpacking all of that with us.
My pleasure. It was fascinating to discuss.